The cowboy man used his last $3 to buy the Apache woman from slavery, to buy her freedom. The sun was just rising over the wide, dusty land of the American frontier. The sky was pale orange, and the wind carried the smell of dry earth and old grass. A lone cowboy walked slowly along a dirt path, his boots worn and cracked from years of hard use. His clothes were faded, patched many times, and loose on his thin frame. He did not look like a man with dreams left, yet inside him lived a quiet strength that had never fully faded. His name was not important to most people. In the towns he passed through, he was known simply as the cowboy. He worked wherever work could be found, mending fences, guiding cattle, fixing wagons, or doing any task others did not want. The pay was always small and the work was always hard. Still, he never complained. He believed that honest labor, no matter how small, had dignity. For weeks, he had worked at a small ranch far from town. The days were long and exhausting. He woke before sunrise and slept long after dark. His hands were rough, his back ached, and his body carried many old injuries. When the work finally ended, the ranch owner paid him $3. It was not much, but to the cowboy it was everything he had. He folded the $3 carefully and placed them deep in his pocket, as if they were something precious. With that money, he planned to buy food, maybe some bread, dried meat, and a little coffee. It would help him survive for a few more days. Survival was something he thought about often. In this land, even strong men could disappear quietly, leaving no trace behind. As he walked toward the nearest trading post, memories followed him like shadows. He remembered a time when life had been different. Long ago, he had family, laughter, and a reason to come home at night. But the frontier was unforgiving. Illness, accidents, and loss had slowly taken everything from him. One by one, the people he loved were gone. After that, he stopped settling in one place. Moving kept the pain from growing too deep. The trading post came into view just before noon. It was a rough wooden building surrounded by wagons, horses, and tired-looking people. Voices filled the air, some loud, some angry, some tired. The smell of sweat, dust, and cooked food mixed together. For many, this place was just another stop. For the cowboy, it was a place to trade his last money for another chance at life. He tied his horse and stepped inside. The room was crowded. Men stood in small groups, talking and laughing. Others argued loudly over prices. The cowboy kept his head down and moved slowly, not wanting attention. He had learned long ago that quiet men were often left alone. As he waited near the counter, something caught his attention. At the far side of the room, near the back wall, stood a small group of men. Their voices were low but sharp. Between them stood an Apache woman. Her hands were bound and her posture was stiff, as if her body had forgotten how to relax. She looked thin and tired, her face marked by days of hardship. Yet even in her weakness, there was a quiet strength in the way she stood. The cowboy had seen many hard things in his life, but this sight made his chest tighten. The woman's eyes moved slowly around the room, not in fear alone, but in deep exhaustion. She did not cry or beg. She simply endured. That endurance spoke louder than any words. The men around her spoke of her as if she were not there, as if she were an object to be discussed and traded. The cowboy could not hear every word, but he understood enough. She was being held against her will. Her freedom had been taken, and now it was being treated as something that could be sold. The cowboy felt anger rise inside him, but he did not show it. He had learned to keep his emotions hidden. Showing anger in places like this often led to trouble, and trouble could be deadly. Still, his eyes never left the woman. He noticed the dirt on her face, the way her shoulders were tense, and the way her eyes briefly met his before looking away again. In that short moment, something passed between them. It was not trust yet, but recognition. Two people who had both lost much recognized the pain in each other. The cowboy looked away, his mind racing. He told himself it was none of his business. He was poor, alone, and barely surviving. What could he do? He had only $3. He needed that money to eat, to live. He reminded himself that the world was full of suffering and one man could not fix it all. He stepped closer to the counter, ready to buy his food and leave. But his feet felt heavy, as if the ground itself was holding him back. His thoughts returned to the woman again and again. He remembered his own losses, the helplessness he had once felt, and the silence that followed when no one came to help. The trading post owner spoke to him, asking what he wanted. The cowboy opened his mouth to answer, but no words came out. Instead, his eyes drifted back toward the woman. The men were still talking, laughing softly now as if discussing something ordinary. Something inside the cowboy shifted. It was not sudden or dramatic. It was slow, like a door opening that had been closed for a long time. He realized that if he walked away now, he would carry this moment with him forever. Hunger would pass, but regret would stay. He reached into his pocket and felt the folded bills. $3, the last of what he owned. His mind argued with his heart. Without that money, the coming days would be brutal. He might go hungry. He might not survive. Yet another thought followed. If he did nothing, he would lose something far greater than comfort. He would lose the part of himself that still believed in doing what was right. The cowboy took a slow breath. He turned away from the counter and walked toward the group at the back of the room. Each step felt heavy, but his resolve grew stronger with every move. The men looked up, surprised by his approach. He was just a poor cowboy, nothing special to look at. They did not expect him to interfere. He stood there quietly for a moment, then spoke in a calm, steady voice. His words were simple, but they carried weight. He asked about the woman. The men answered casually, explaining the price of her freedom, as if it were a small matter. The cowboy listened without interrupting. When they finished, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the $3. He held them out in his open hand. The room seemed to grow quieter, as if even the walls were listening. "This is all I have," he said softly. The men laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But when they saw his face, they realized he was serious. The laughter faded, replaced by surprise and disbelief. No one had expected a man with so little to offer everything he had. The cowboy did not argue or plead. He simply stood there, his hand steady, his expression calm. In that moment, his life as he knew it balanced on a thin line. Hunger, danger, and uncertainty waited on one side. On the other side stood a single choice, one that would change everything. The woman looked at him again, this time longer. For the first time, something like hope flickered in her eyes. The cowboy did not notice. He was too focused on the weight of his decision. He did not know what would happen next. He only knew that turning back was no longer an option. And with that silent offering of his last $3, the course of 2 lives began to change. The room stayed quiet after the cowboy held out his $3. The men near the wall stared at the money, then at his face, trying to understand why a poor man would do such a thing. To them, $3 was almost nothing. To the cowboy, it was his last chance to eat. Still, his hand did not shake. One of the men stepped forward and counted the money slowly, as if enjoying the moment. Others watched with mild interest, like people watching a small show. After a short discussion among themselves, they agreed. The exchange was made quickly, without ceremony or kindness. To them, it was just business. The ropes around the Apache woman's wrists were loosened. When they fell away, she did not move right away. Her hands were stiff, her arms weak. She looked down at her wrists, rubbing them gently, as if reminding herself that she could move freely again. The men stepped back, already losing interest, and turned their attention to other matters. The cowboy lowered his hand and felt the empty space in his pocket. It felt strange, lighter than before. Fear brushed against his thoughts, but he pushed it aside. He looked at the woman, unsure of what to say or do next. He had not thought beyond this moment. All he knew was that she should not stay here. The woman slowly lifted her eyes and met his gaze. Her face showed confusion mixed with caution. Freedom was new and fragile, like thin glass. She did not know if it would last. She had learned not to trust easily. Still, something in the cowboy's quiet manner told her he meant no harm. He spoke gently, using simple words. He told her she was free and did not owe him anything. His voice was calm, without pride or expectation. He did not touch her or step too close. He understood that space mattered. She listened carefully, as if weighing each word. Then she nodded once, a small movement but full of meaning. She spoke softly in a language he did not understand, her voice steady but tired. Even though he could not understand her words, he understood her tone. It was a mix of gratitude and disbelief. The trading post began to return to its usual noise. People laughed, argued, and moved around as if nothing important had happened. That bothered the cowboy. Something life-changing had just occurred, yet the world continued without pause. He motioned toward the door, asking with a look if she wanted to leave. She hesitated, glancing around the room, then nodded again. Together, they stepped outside into the bright daylight. The air felt different outside, cleaner. The woman took a deep breath, as if filling her lungs for the first time in a long while. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. The cowboy noticed this and felt a quiet relief. At least here she was not surrounded by staring eyes and harsh voices. They stood for a moment, unsure of what came next. The cowboy felt the weight of his choice settle fully now. He had no money, little food, and no clear plan. But when he looked at the woman standing beside him, he felt no regret, only responsibility. He pointed toward the edge of town, where the land opened wide and empty. He explained, slowly and carefully, that he planned to head that way. He did not know where he would end up, but he would not turn her away. If she wanted to go her own way, he would respect that. The woman listened closely. She looked toward the land, then back at the trading post, then at the people moving in and out. Her face hardened for a moment, as if remembering what she had just escaped. Then she looked back at the open land and nodded firmly. She would go with him, at least for now. They began walking together, side by side, but not too close. The cowboy adjusted his pace to match hers. He noticed she walked carefully, conserving her strength. She was weak from lack of food and rest. He wished he had something to give her, but his pockets were empty. As they moved farther from town, the sounds faded behind them. Only the wind and the soft rhythm of their steps remained. The silence was not uncomfortable. It felt honest. After some time, the cowboy broke the silence. He offered her water from his canteen. It was nearly empty, but he did not hesitate. She accepted it with both hands and drank slowly, respectfully. When she handed it back, there was still some left. That small act told him much about her character. They continued walking until the sun stood high in the sky. Heat pressed down on them and the land seemed endless. The cowboy's stomach growled, reminding him of what he had given up. He ignored it and focused on the path ahead. Eventually, they reached a small patch of shade near a group of rocks. The cowboy suggested they rest. The woman agreed, lowering herself carefully to the ground. He sat a short distance away, keeping his movements slow and predictable. As they rested, he tried again to speak with her. He used gestures and simple words, pointing to himself and saying his name. She listened, then spoke her own name softly. He repeated it carefully, hoping to say it right. A faint smile touched her lips for the first time. That smile stayed with him. It reminded him why he had made his choice. As the afternoon passed, they shared small pieces of their stories using gestures, expressions, and simple sounds. He learned that she had been taken far from her people. She learned that he had no family waiting for him. Though their words were limited, their understanding grew. When they started walking again, the woman's steps grew slower. The cowboy noticed and offered his arm for support. She hesitated, then accepted lightly. He kept his movements steady, making sure she felt safe. As evening approached, the temperature dropped. The cowboy knew they needed shelter. He led them toward a dry creek bed where he had once camped before. There, he gathered sticks and built a small fire using skill learned from years on the road. The woman watched him closely. When the fire caught, its warm light reflected in her eyes. She sat near it, holding her hands out to the heat. The simple comfort of warmth seemed to ease something deep inside her. They had no food to cook, only warmth and rest. Still, it felt like enough for one night. The cowboy wrapped himself in his worn blanket and offered part of it to her. She accepted quietly. As darkness settled over the land, the stars appeared one by one. The world felt vast and quiet. Lying there, the cowboy thought about the uncertainty ahead. Hunger, danger, and long days waited for them. Yet he also felt something he had not felt in a long time: purpose. The woman stared up at the sky, her expression calm. For the first time in a long while, she was not being watched or controlled. She was simply a person resting under open stars. They said little that night. Words were not needed. Trust was being built in silence, slowly and carefully. That night marked the beginning of something new. Freedom had been given, but survival still had to be earned. Neither of them knew what tomorrow would bring. But as the fire burned low and the stars shone above, one thing was clear. They were no longer alone, and their journey forward, though difficult, would be faced together. Morning arrived quietly. The sky slowly changed color, and soft light spread across the open land. The fire from the night before had turned into cold ash. The cowboy woke first, as he always did. Years of living outdoors had trained his body to rise with the sun. He sat up carefully and looked around. The Apache woman was still asleep, wrapped in the blanket he had shared. Her face looked calmer than before, free from tension. Seeing that brought him a small sense of peace. He stood up and stretched his stiff muscles, feeling hunger twist inside his stomach. He ignored it. Hunger was familiar. Worrying about it would change nothing. He walked a short distance away and scanned the land. No people, no danger in sight, only wide earth, rocks, and low hills in the distance. The land was quiet, but quiet did not always mean safe. He stayed alert. When he returned, the woman was awake, sitting upright and watching the sky. She noticed him and gave a small nod. He nodded back. That simple exchange felt meaningful. It showed comfort without words. They had no food left. The cowboy explained this as best he could, using simple gestures and honest expressions. He did not hide the truth. Life on the frontier was hard, and pretending otherwise only led to trouble. She listened and nodded again, showing she understood. He pointed toward the hills and then to himself, explaining that he would try to find work or food. He asked, using a look more than words, if she was strong enough to travel. She stood slowly and tested her legs. She was weak, but she did not want to stop. She made that clear with a firm look. They packed up what little they had. The cowboy placed the blanket over his shoulder and offered her the canteen again. She drank sparingly and handed it back. Then they started walking. The path was rough and the sun climbed quickly. Dust rose with every step. As the hours passed, the woman's steps became slower. The cowboy noticed immediately. He slowed down and chose easier paths, even if they were longer. They reached a small settlement near midday. It was little more than a few buildings and a corral. Smoke rose from one chimney and a few people moved about. The cowboy felt both hope and worry. Places like this could offer work, but they could also bring trouble. He stopped at the edge and spoke quietly to the woman. He told her to stay close. He would do the talking. She agreed. They entered slowly. Eyes turned toward them, some curious, some suspicious. The cowboy kept his posture calm and respectful. He walked to a man repairing a fence and asked if there was any work to be done. The man looked him up and down and then glanced at the woman. His expression was hard to read. After a long moment, he said there was work clearing stones from a field. It was heavy labor, but it would earn them food for the day. The cowboy accepted without hesitation. He thanked the man and went straight to work. He lifted stones under the hot sun, his muscles burning. Every movement reminded him of his hunger, but he pushed through. The woman watched at first. Then, despite her weakness, she began helping in small ways, carrying lighter stones, clearing the ground with her hands. The cowboy noticed and tried to stop her, but she shook her head. She wanted to contribute. Pride mattered to her. By late afternoon, the work was done. The man handed the cowboy some bread, dried meat, and a small bag of grain. It was not much, but it felt like a feast. The cowboy thanked him again. They moved away from the settlement before nightfall. Sitting under a tree, they shared the food carefully, slowly. The woman ate quietly, savoring each bite. The cowboy did the same, feeling strength return to his body. That night, as they rested, something shifted between them. It was not sudden, but clear. They were no longer just two people walking together. They were partners in survival. Over the next few days, they traveled from place to place. Sometimes the cowboy found small jobs. Sometimes they went hungry. The woman grew stronger with each passing day. Color returned to her face. Her steps became steady. They began to understand each other better. She taught him words from her language, pointing at objects and repeating sounds patiently. He did the same in return. Their conversations were simple but full of meaning. One evening, while sitting by a fire, the woman spoke for a long time, her voice soft but steady. He did not understand the words, but he understood the pain behind them. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, she looked at him, her eyes searching. He placed a hand over his heart and nodded. It was his way of saying he heard her, that he respected her story. As days turned into weeks, the cowboy began to feel the weight of his choice more deeply. There were moments when hunger felt unbearable, nights when the cold cut through his blanket, moments when he wondered if he had been foolish. But every time doubt rose, he remembered her eyes in that trading post. He remembered the look of freedom slowly returning to her face. That memory gave him strength. One afternoon, they came across a river. The water was clear and cool. They washed their hands and faces, laughing softly when the cold surprised them. That laughter felt strange to the cowboy. He had not laughed in a long time. The woman smiled openly now. Not often, but when she did, it felt like sunlight breaking through clouds. The cowboy realized that her presence had changed him. He was still poor, still uncertain, but he felt less empty. Trouble came one evening when they noticed tracks nearby, fresh tracks. Human, the cowboy's body tensed. He knew danger when he saw it. He guided the woman off the main path and into thick brush. They stayed quiet for hours, barely breathing. The woman followed his lead without question. When the danger passed, relief washed over them both. It was a reminder that freedom came with risks. That night, the woman stayed close to the fire. The cowboy stayed awake longer than usual, watching the dark. Protecting her felt natural, not forced. As they lay down to rest, the cowboy thought about the future. He did not know where they were going. He did not know how they would survive, but he knew one thing with certainty: he would not abandon her. The woman looked at him and spoke a single word he had learned. It meant trust. He nodded, understanding fully. Their journey was far from easy. Every day tested them. Every step forward required effort and courage. But together, they were learning how to live again. And in the quiet moments between hardship and hope, the cowboy realized something important. Giving away his last $3 had taken his comfort, but it had given his life meaning. What lay ahead was unknown, but whatever it was, they would face it together, one step at a time. The days grew longer as they moved deeper into open land. The air felt different here, cleaner but more demanding. There were fewer settlements, fewer chances for work, and longer stretches without seeing another person. The cowboy knew this land well. It tested everyone who walked through it. Still, he chose this path because it offered something important: space to breathe and fewer dangers from people who did not wish them well. The Apache woman walked beside him with more strength now. Her steps were steady, and her posture showed growing confidence. Though her body still carried signs of past hardship, her spirit was clearly returning. The cowboy noticed the change and felt proud, though he did not say it aloud. One morning, clouds gathered suddenly, dark and heavy. The wind picked up and the land seemed to hold its breath. The cowboy recognized the signs of an approaching storm. He pointed toward a line of low rocks and guided her quickly. They barely reached shelter before rain began to fall. The rain came hard and fast. Water soaked the ground, turning dust into thick mud. Thunder rolled across the sky, loud and sharp. They stayed close to the rocks, wrapped in the blanket, waiting. The woman flinched at the sound of thunder, but she did not panic. The cowboy stayed calm, speaking softly, reminding her they were safe. When the storm passed, the land looked different. Small streams formed where there had been none before. The air smelled fresh. The woman stepped out and held her face up to the sky, letting the cool drops touch her skin. For her, even the rain felt like a gift. That afternoon, they followed one of the streams and found berries growing nearby. The woman recognized them and smiled, pointing eagerly. She showed him which ones were safe. Together, they gathered enough to eat and save for later. That small success lifted their spirits. As they ate, she spoke more than usual, using gestures and words they had both learned. She explained, as best she could, that her people once lived close to water and land like this. Her voice carried both love and sadness. The cowboy listened closely, understanding that she was sharing something precious. That night they made camp near the stream. The fire burned steadily, and for once hunger was not pressing. They ate quietly, comfortable in each other's presence. The stars above seemed brighter than before. The next morning brought trouble. As they packed to leave, the cowboy noticed signs that others had been nearby. Broken branches, footprints, not old ones. His body stiffened. He did not want to scare her, but he needed her to understand the risk. He showed her the tracks and explained with serious gestures. She nodded, her face growing alert. She had lived with danger long enough to recognize it. They changed direction immediately, moving away from the stream and into rougher land. The cowboy chose paths that were harder to follow. The sun climbed high and the heat returned, but they did not stop. Safety mattered more than comfort. By late afternoon, the woman stumbled. The cowboy caught her before she fell. He could feel how tired she was. Pushing further would be dangerous. He searched the area and found a narrow space between rocks that offered shelter. They rested there, hidden from view. The cowboy gave her water and spoke gently, encouraging her to rest. She tried to protest, but he shook his head firmly. This time she listened. As she slept, the cowboy stayed awake, watching and listening. His mind was filled with worry. He knew that protecting her meant putting himself in danger, but the thought of leaving her alone was impossible. The choice had been made long ago. Hours passed slowly. Eventually, he heard nothing but wind. When the woman woke, she looked embarrassed for needing help. He smiled softly and reassured her with a few simple words. Strength, he reminded her, was not only about walking far, it was also about knowing when to rest. They waited until evening to move again. Under the fading light, they continued quietly. No signs of pursuit followed. Relief settled between them, though neither said it out loud. The next days were a mix of small victories and hard moments. Some days they found food or work. Other days they relied on skill and patience. The woman began helping more, teaching him how to spot signs in the land, where animals might pass, where water might collect, which plants could be used carefully. The cowboy realized he was learning as much from her as she was from him. Their roles were not fixed. Sometimes he led, sometimes she did. That balance mattered. One evening they reached a wide valley filled with tall grass. The sunset painted the sky in deep orange and purple. They stood quietly, taking it in. Moments like this were rare and precious. The woman spoke softly, pointing toward the horizon. She explained that land like this reminded her of home. Her voice trembled slightly. The cowboy felt the weight of her words. Home was not just a place. It was safety, belonging, and memory. He did not know if he could help her find that again, but he knew he could help her move forward. That night, as they sat by the fire, the cowboy shared more of his own past than ever before. He spoke of the people he had lost, the loneliness that followed, and the long road that had shaped him. His words were simple, but they carried years of pain. The woman listened without interrupting. When he finished, she reached out and placed her hand gently on his arm. It was a small gesture, but it held deep meaning. It said that he was no longer alone with his memories. The following morning, they came across an old trail leading toward higher ground. The cowboy recognized it as a route traders once used. It was risky but could lead them to safer territory. He explained the choice carefully. The woman thought for a moment, then agreed. She trusted his judgment. The climb was hard, the path was steep, and the wind was strong. But when they reached the top, the view was wide and clear. From there they could see far into the distance. No signs of danger, just open land. The cowboy felt hope rise quietly inside him, not loud or certain but real. As they stood there, the woman looked at him and spoke slowly, choosing her words with care. She told him that what he had done, giving up everything, was something she would never forget. Freedom, she said, was more than being released. It was being seen as human. The cowboy swallowed hard, emotion tightening his chest. He nodded, unable to speak. They moved on as the sun climbed higher, their shadows stretching behind them. The road ahead was still uncertain. Hard days would come. Challenges would test them again. But something important had already changed. They were no longer just surviving. They were building something: trust, understanding, and a future shaped not by what had been taken from them, but by what they chose to protect. And that choice continued to guide every step they took forward. The land slowly changed as they traveled farther from the hard paths behind them. The hills became softer, the ground less dry, and the air carried a calmer feeling. It was as if the world itself was giving them a chance to rest. The cowboy noticed this, though he did not say it aloud. He had learned that hope worked best when carried quietly. The Apache woman walked with steady steps now. Her strength had returned in ways that could not be measured by food alone. Her eyes were clear, her shoulders straight, and her movements confident. She was no longer just surviving each day. She was living it. One morning they reached a small river that curved gently through the land. Trees grew along its banks, offering shade and shelter. Birds moved freely above, and the sound of water flowing felt peaceful. The cowboy stopped and looked around carefully. This place felt right. They rested near the river, washing their hands and faces. The woman laughed softly when the water splashed her arms. The sound surprised the cowboy. It had been a long time since he had heard laughter without pain behind it. Hearing it now filled him with quiet joy. They decided to stay there for a few days. The cowboy set simple traps and caught small fish. The woman gathered plants she recognized and showed him how to prepare them safely. Together, they worked without rush. There was no fear pushing them forward, no danger close behind. At night, they sat by the fire and spoke more than ever before. Their words were still simple, but understanding had grown deep. They shared stories, memories, and thoughts about the future, not plans exactly, just possibilities. The woman spoke of her people, of songs sung under open skies, and of stories passed from one generation to the next. She spoke with sadness, but also with pride. Those things had not been taken from her. They lived inside her. The cowboy listened closely. He realized that while he had lost much, he had also gained something rare: connection. For years, he had believed he was meant to walk alone. Now, sitting beside the fire, he understood that loneliness was not strength. Choosing care was. On the fourth day, they saw smoke rising in the distance. The cowboy tensed at once. Old habits returned quickly. But after watching carefully, he realized it came from a small, peaceful settlement. Families lived there, tending land and animals. There was no sign of trouble. They talked quietly about what to do. The woman did not want to rush. She had learned the cost of trust. The cowboy respected that. He suggested they approach slowly, ready to turn away if needed. When they reached the settlement, they were met with caution but not hostility. The people there were simple folk living close to the land. The cowboy spoke honestly. He offered his skills in exchange for food and shelter. He asked for nothing more. The woman stood beside him, calm and proud. She did not hide behind him. She stood as his equal. After some discussion, the people agreed. There was work to be done, fences to repair, land to clear, water to carry. It was honest work, the kind the cowboy understood well. Days turned into weeks. The cowboy worked hard as he always had, but now his labor felt different. It was no longer just about survival. It was about building something stable. The woman helped too, sharing her knowledge of plants and land. The people began to respect her wisdom. They listened when she spoke. That mattered. Slowly, a place formed for them there. Not handed to them, but earned through effort and trust. They were given a small space near the river to stay. It was simple, but it was safe. One evening, as the sun set, the cowboy sat alone for a moment, watching the light fade. He thought about the $3 he had given away. At the time, it had felt like everything he had. Now he understood that it was only money. What he had gained could not be counted. The woman joined him, sitting quietly. After a moment, she spoke in careful words he could understand. She told him that because of his choice, she could decide her own path again. She could stay, or she could one day return to her people. That choice belonged to her. The cowboy nodded. That was how it should be. She looked at him and smiled gently. She said that whatever path she chose, she would carry his kindness with her, that his action had shown her that goodness still existed, even in hard places. The cowboy felt his throat tighten. He had never expected gratitude. He had acted because it was right. Still, hearing her words filled him with a quiet peace. As seasons changed, their lives settled into a steady rhythm. They worked, rested, and shared simple joys. There were still hard days. Life never stopped being difficult. But it no longer felt empty. The cowboy found himself laughing more, sleeping better, caring not out of duty but out of choice. He had found purpose again, not through wealth or comfort, but through connection. One morning, the woman told him she was thinking of traveling east, closer to where her people once lived. Not to return to the past, but to honor it. She wanted to walk that path freely. The cowboy listened and nodded. He felt sadness, but not fear. He had learned that real care did not mean holding on. It meant supporting someone's strength. When the day came for her to leave, the settlement gathered quietly. There were no loud goodbyes, just understanding. The cowboy walked with her to the edge of the river. They stood there, facing the path ahead. She thanked him one last time, placing her hand over her heart. He did the same. Then she turned and walked forward, her steps confident, her future her own. The cowboy watched until she was gone from sight. He felt the ache of separation, but also pride. He had not saved her. He had simply chosen to see her as human. As he turned back toward the settlement, the sun rose higher in the sky. The land looked wide and full of promise. He returned to his work, his life changed forever. The cowboy who once owned nothing now carried something far greater, a story of courage, sacrifice, and humanity. A reminder that even the smallest act, given with an open heart, can change the direction of many lives. And in the quiet of the open land, that truth continued to live on.